My husband put my name on his parents' foreclosure paperwork without telling me. They're like your family too, he claimed. When I got evicted from my own apartment. His mother laughed until I said one thing. I was married to a man named Bryce for 4 years. We met in Charlotte, North Carolina, in one of those new microbreweries that pop up on every corner now. He had that soft-spoken charm and this slow, patient way of talking that made you feel like he really saw you. The kind of man who offered to carry your groceries to the car, always opened doors, always said ma'am to older women in restaurants. He was a carpenter and talked a lot about how he wanted to start flipping houses. I believed in him. I loved that he had dreams bigger than his paycheck. I had a stable job as a dental hygienist and owned a small 2-bedroom apartment I'd worked hard to buy by myself at 26. I was proud of it. Every chair, every piece of art, every mug in the kitchen, it all had a story, and it was all mine. When we got married, he moved into my place. I was okay with that. We were saving to buy a house together, or so I thought. His parents, Ronald and Myra, lived about 40 minutes away in Gastonia. Their house looked fancy from the outside, but you could tell from the inside it was all a facade. Old carpeting, a kitchen stuck in the 90s, and a vibe like nothing had been truly cleaned in years, only Febrezed. Still, they carried themselves like royalty. Myra especially. She wore pearls to Walmart and had this way of making every compliment sound like a veiled insult. I just love how casual your place is, she once said, looking around my apartment. Very unpretentious. Ronald didn't say much. He was the kind of man who only grunted in agreement or cleared his throat to disagree. But Bryce loved them, and I tried. I really did. In the first year of our marriage, I started to notice odd things. Bryce was always on the phone in the other room, speaking in low tones. He'd hush up when I walked in. I asked him once who he was talking to, and he brushed it off, just work stuff. Then he started mentioning that his parents were going through it financially, and that they might need a little help. I didn't press too much. I figured, okay, if we can afford to send them some grocery money or help cover a bill, that's fine. Families help each other, right? Then I started noticing withdrawals from our joint account. Not huge at first, $150 here, $200 there. I asked him about it, and he said it was for car repairs, plumbing emergencies, things like that. Just temporary, he told me. They'll pay us back. I wasn't happy about it, but I let it go. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. It was a collections agency. They told me I was on the hook for a foreclosure loan, one I never applied for. My first thought was identity theft. The agent read the address, 701 Pepperidge Lane. I froze. That was Ronald and Myra's house. I told them there had to be some mistake, and they said no, Celia Whitaker, co-signer on a second mortgage taken out 6 months ago. I hung up in a daze. I confronted Bryce that night. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He said it like he was explaining why he borrowed my hoodie. I didn't want to stress you out, he said. It was just paperwork. You weren't going to be affected. You forged my name. I signed for you. We're married. It's the same. It's not the same. He started getting defensive. They were gonna lose the house. You think I could just let that happen? You could have asked me, I snapped. You could have told me. You could have respected me enough to at least let me be part of the decision. They're your family too now, he said, like that somehow made it better. We didn't speak the rest of the night. I laid awake thinking about everything, the money, the signatures, the months of quiet conversations on the phone. A week later, I got home from work and saw a notice on the door. My stomach dropped before I even read it. The language was cold and final. My apartment, was being foreclosed. Somehow, they had tied my property to the loan. I didn't even know that was possible. I spent hours on the phone with the bank. They explained it to me like I should have known, because my name was tied to the loan, and because we were married, the assets we shared were considered available collateral. Apparently, in some legal twist, they had used my property as part of the equation to approve the second mortgage. It didn't make sense. I cried. I screamed into a pillow. Then I did the only thing I could think of, I drove to Gastonia. When Myra opened the door, she had this smug look on her face. She was wearing one of those overpressed blouses and fake gold earrings. "Oh, Celia," she said with a tight smile. Come in, come in." "Trouble at home?" I stood there, shaking. "I got evicted," I said. "From my own apartment." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's the risk you take when you marry into a family." She actually laughed. That sound, I'll never forget it. High-pitched, dry, fake. Like she was toasting my downfall. Ronald was on the couch watching golf. Bryce came in from the kitchen, holding a beer. "You let this happen?" I asked him, my voice trembling. "You watched me lose everything?" "I didn't know it would get that bad," he muttered. "You signed for me." Then Myra said, "You really should have read the fine print, dear." And that was it. That's when I said the one thing that finally shut them all up. "I filed a police report," I said. "For forgery. They're opening an investigation. You'll be served within the week." Silence. For the first time since I walked into that house, nobody had anything to say. Myra's face dropped like someone had pulled the rug from under her. Bryce started to speak, then stopped. I turned and walked out. I wish I could say that moment fixed everything. It didn't. It was just the beginning of a long, painful process of unraveling lies and betrayal. But it was also the moment I took back control. When I got back home that night, if you could even still call it home, I sat on the floor of my now half-packed apartment, surrounded by boxes and silence. I had 3 weeks left to vacate. 3 weeks to find somewhere else to live, on a budget that had been drained by someone else's lies. I kept going over that moment in my head. The look on Myra's face when I said the words "police report" was the first real satisfaction I'd felt in weeks. But it was fleeting, and beneath it was this deeper pain, like something inside me had split permanently. You don't come back from betrayal like that. Not the kind that doesn't just ruin your trust, but takes your home down with it. The next morning, Bryce texted me. No apology. No explanation. Just a sentence. "Can we talk before you do anything else?" I didn't respond. Instead, I called the detective who'd been assigned to my case. A woman named Detective Aranda, who had this clipped way of talking that somehow made me feel safer, like she had no time for nonsense. "We're pursuing charges," she said. "Forgery's a felony in North Carolina. You're lucky you had proof of your original signatures. We've seen people lose everything." I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. Still, I gave her every piece of paper I could find. Bank statements. The mortgage notice. Photos of the apartment. Even an old email I'd sent to Bryce 6 months prior, asking why we were getting mail from his parents' bank at our address. He'd told me it was a mix-up. Aranda seemed to already know the type of man he was. "Men like your husband," she said, "they don't think they're doing anything wrong until they're caught. They're not sorry. They're just sorry they're not smarter." 2 days later, Bryce got served at work. I know this because his friend Miguel, who had always liked me more than him, texted me a single line, "Your boy got hit at lunch." Papers in front of the whole crew. A few hours later, Bryce called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, though. I didn't listen to it right away. I just stared at the little red notification, knowing whatever he said, it would be for him, not me. Later that night, I played it. "I messed up, okay? I was just trying to help my parents. I thought I could fix it before it hit you. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, Celia, don't do this. You'll ruin me." I played it twice. Not because I was considering anything, Just because I wanted to hear how someone could sound so desperate without ever once saying I'm sorry. The next week was a blur of legal meetings, sorting my things, and answering questions from the detective. Bryce's lawyer sent a formal request for a private mediation instead of a court hearing, but I said no. I wanted it on the record. All of it. And that's when Myra started calling. At first, it was just hang-ups. Then voicemails. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," she said once. Another time, "You don't destroy your family over a misunderstanding." The one that made me finally block her was this: "You'll regret this, Celia. You think the world will believe you over your husband and his family?" That told me everything I needed to know. They still didn't believe I was capable of fighting back. And maybe once, they would have been right. But I was a different person now. 2 weeks before my final move-out date, I found a tiny rental on the edge of Matthews, barely affordable but mine. No shared deed. No co-signers. Just me and the dog I'd impulsively adopted from a shelter. He was an anxious mess, like me, and I named him Hugo. He didn't solve anything, but having something small and living to care for gave me a reason to get out of bed. The divorce process started quietly. Bryce, through his attorney, offered a settlement. He wanted to make it right. He'd pay off the back mortgage fees on the apartment if I dropped the criminal complaint. I laughed when my lawyer told me. "I'm not for sale," I said. She smiled and nodded like she'd heard that line 100 times before. We filed anyway. He tried to paint me as a vindictive wife, emotionally unstable, unwilling to support his family, neglectful. But it didn't stick. My attorney, Sharonda, was sharp as HLL. She pulled every receipt, every email, every photo. She showed how my apartment had been bought independently, how I'd paid every bill until the moment it got tied to his parents' financial collapse. But the kicker? That came from the detective. They had proof of forged documents. Bryce had downloaded a feeable PDF from an online notary site. He'd practiced signing my name 3 times on a sheet of scrap paper that he left in a desk drawer. 3 versions of my signature. 3 strikes. When that got brought into court, it was over. The judge ruled in my favor on the divorce. Full separation of assets. Bryce was fined, put on probation for 18 months, and had to repay a portion of the foreclosure damages to the bank. It wasn't enough to fix my credit. But it was enough to give me peace. Ronald and Myra stopped showing up after that. No more calls. No more voicemails. Word got around that they were selling off furniture to make ends meet. Their house went up for auction. Bryce moved in with a cousin across town and started working under the table jobs to avoid garnishment. Miguel sent me an update once. "Your ex is building decks for weed money. Karma's a heck of a thing." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By now, my life had become quiet. Predictable. My weekends were full of long walks with Hugo and quiet dinners with my sister Nora, who'd stepped in with a spare bedroom when I had nowhere else to go. We never talked about Bryce, not unless I brought him up. Instead, we talked about the future. About how sometimes, hitting rock bottom isn't the end, it's the start of a new foundation. Still, there are moments. Random ones. Like walking past a Lowe's and seeing a truck that looks like Bryce's. Or hearing someone say, "We're family, right?" and feeling my stomach twist. Because that phrase? It's never just words. It's a warning. I wish I could say the hardest part was over once the court papers were signed and Bryce was officially my ex. But if you've ever been burned by family, the kind you didn't choose, you know that the ashes smolder long after the fire's gone out. 3 months after the court decision, I was starting to breathe again. I'd landed a promotion at the dental clinic, picked up more hours, and was slowly paying down the balance I still owed on the legal fees. My credit was a mess, but I was rebuilding, brick by brick. Then I got a letter in the mail. It was from Ronald and Myra. At first, I wasn't going to open it. I stood in the kitchen holding the envelope like it might burn me. But curiosity got the better of me. It was 2 pages. Typed. Signed by both of them. It started with some nonsense about forgiveness. We are family, and family should forgive. Then it turned into a guilt trip, laced with veiled threats. They blamed me for the foreclosure, said I'd overreacted, that my inflexibility had torn the family apart. And then, the kicker, they were asking me for help. Yes. After all that. Myra wrote that they were in a desperate situation, that Ronald's health was declining, and that they were being evicted from the duplex they'd been renting. She even had the nerve to say, "We took you in as one of our own. We were like parents to you. Now we ask you to show the same loyalty." I nearly choked. These were the same people who laughed when I lost my home. The same ones who forged my name and used me like a pawn. I didn't respond. I didn't even rip up the letter. I just folded it and put it in a drawer, where I keep all the things that remind me who people really are when they're stripped of excuses. A few weeks later, I ran into Bryce. Of all places, it was in a Publix parking lot in South Charlotte. I'd just finished shopping, and he was sitting on the curb next to a pickup that had definitely seen better days. He looked thinner. Hollowed out. The kind of person you'd cross the street to avoid, not out of fear, just pity. He saw me and stood up. "Celia," he said, like he was surprised. "Hey." I nodded. I wasn't going to play the game. "You look good," he said. "I mean, you look happy." "I am," I said simply. There was this awkward silence, like he was waiting for me to say more. Apologize for making his life harder. Tell him I missed him. Something. But I didn't owe him any of that. I wanted to say. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, rubbing the back of his neck. "About everything." I didn't reply right away. Just looked at him. For the first time, I really saw him, not the man I'd married, but the one who'd been standing behind that illusion all along. Someone small. Scared. Weak. "You're not sorry for what you did," I finally said. "You're sorry it didn't work." He looked away. "Maybe. But I still meant it." "Okay." That's all I said. Then I got in my car and left. After that day, I didn't hear from him again for a while. But the universe wasn't done with the Whitakers. Not yet. It was the middle of summer when I got a call from Nora, my sister, who'd heard through one of her clients that Myra had started working at a second-hand boutique in Matthews. I almost laughed when she told me. "You're joking," I said. "Nope," she said. "You know that little shop by the bus depot? The one with all the knockoff purses?" I did. I'd walked past it a dozen times. She works the register. A friend of mine saw her arguing with a customer over a coupon. The image of Myra, pearl-wearing, backhanded comment Myra, hunched behind a cash register fighting over a $5 discount? It should have made me feel smug. But it didn't. Instead, it made me realize just how fragile that whole family empire really was. Everything they'd built, everything they'd pretended to be, it was smoke. All it took was one gust of truth, and it came crashing down. A week later, something else happened. I got a message request on Facebook from a woman named Desiree. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity wins again. The message said, "Hi. I hope this isn't too weird, but I think I'm dating your ex-husband." I blinked at the screen. She went on, "He mentioned he was married before but said it ended because his wife couldn't handle family obligations." I didn't buy it. I did some digging. Found your name. Found the court case. I just wanted to hear it from you. For a second, I just stared at the message. Part of me didn't want to get involved. Another part of me wanted to reply in all caps, "Run." But I didn't. I waited a full day before I answered her. He forged my name to sign a loan that got me evicted. Then he blamed me for it. If you're asking whether he tells the truth, the answer is no. You're free to make your own decision, but at least now you have all the facts. She replied almost immediately. That's what I thought. Thank you. That was it. No drama. No back and forth. But it felt like the first time in a long time that I was able to turn my pain into something useful. And it didn't stop there. About a month after that, I got subpoenaed. Not because of anything I did, but because Ronald and Myra were being investigated for bankruptcy fraud. Apparently, after losing the house, they'd tried to file for bankruptcy and failed to disclose several assets, including one of Ronald's investment properties he'd tried to hide in his cousin's name. Guess who else was listed as a financial affiliate on the paperwork? Me. They were still trying to drag me down, even from the graveyard of their own consequences. This time, though, I was ready. I had an attorney on speed dial. I'd kept every letter, every email. I showed up to the deposition with a folder so thick the lawyer on their side looked like he wanted to crawl into his briefcase and die. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done being the one who played nice while everyone else played dirty. The bankruptcy case ended up being the final act in the Whitaker family circus. Their lies had finally tangled so tightly around them that they couldn't tell which way was up anymore. I didn't even have to lift a finger this time, well, besides showing up to court and handing over the files. Myra tried to pin the false asset declarations on a clerical mistake, but even the judge looked like he was tired of hearing her voice. Ronald sat there red-faced and silent, the same way he always had, letting everyone else clean up his messes. The court ruled against them. Again. They were barred from declaring bankruptcy for 5 years and hit with penalties for filing fraudulent paperwork. One of Ronald's old rental properties, yes, the one he tried to hide, was repossessed and sold at auction. The proceeds didn't even cover their fines. Meanwhile, Bryce was still working odd jobs and living in someone's guest room, trying to duck wage garnishments. The last I heard, he was delivering furniture for a third-party moving service and still telling people I ruined his life. I didn't care. Because by then, my life had changed. Not just the surface stuff, the better job, the better apartment, the steady peace I felt every morning, but deep down, where the real healing happens. I'd stopped jumping when the phone rang. I stopped worrying that the next letter in the mail would be another disaster waiting to explode. And then something unexpected happened. Remember Desiree? The woman who messaged me saying she was dating Bryce? She messaged again. Hey. Weird question, are you free to talk? I'm dealing with some stuff related to the Whitakers. I was hesitant, but curious enough to say yes. We agreed to meet for coffee. She was younger than me, maybe mid-20s. Sweet. Nervous. She started talking fast, telling me how after Bryce kind of ghosted her, she kept getting strange texts and emails. Fake numbers, weird accusations, even threats saying she'd regret turning on family. At first, she thought it was Bryce. Then she figured it out, it was Myra. She's been stalking me, Desiree said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she was trying to hold herself together. And not just me. She found my mom on Facebook. My boss. I exhaled slowly. That sounds like her. She also said, you were trying to sabotage them. She said you were obsessed. I burst out laughing. Not out of amusement. Out of disbelief. Obsessed? I said. That woman still thinks everyone else is the villain in her story. I want to report her, Desiree said. But I don't know where to start. You just did. I helped her file the paperwork. I gave her the detective's name, even sent her copies of my old case files and restraining order documentation. Myra had never been served before, it wasn't worth the effort, but now? This was something new. Desiree wasn't just some ex's new girlfriend. She was a person with a voice, and I wasn't going to let Myra scare her into silence. And the best part? Desiree was a paralegal. She knew exactly how to file the paperwork, press the harassment charges, and show up in court looking like every defense attorney's worst nightmare. And I was there too, in the front row, When Myra was finally served with a protective order and slapped with a formal harassment warning. I watched her get escorted out of the courtroom after causing a scene, shrieking about disrespect and ingratitude. She looked at me like I'd personally dragged her into heck. I didn't flinch. Because here's the thing about people like her, they never think the rules apply to them. They never expect the people they hurt to grow a backbone. And when they finally realize they can't win anymore, they panic. That was Myra. A woman who lived her life throwing knives from behind a smile, finally left standing in a courtroom with nothing but her pearls and a list of people she'd pushed too far. I thought that would be the end. But karma had one more thing to say. One day, months later, I got a call from a reporter. She was working on a story about real estate fraud and wanted to interview me about my experience. At first, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to become some viral sob story. But she promised it would be about recovery, about how to protect yourself, about how these things happen to regular people. She said my story could help. So I did it. I told the whole thing. From the forged signature to the foreclosure to the family manipulation. She even included quotes from Desiree and snippets of the court rulings. She did her research. The story blew up locally. And guess who saw it? Ronald and Myra's new landlord. Turns out, they'd been lying on their rental applications, saying they had no prior evictions and no legal issues. The article exposed everything. They were evicted again. This time, there was no safety net. No cousin's basement to run to. No second mortgage. No sweet-talking Myra could do to fix it. They ended up in a weekly rate motel on the edge of town. One of those places with flickering lights and stained carpets, where the front desk has a bulletproof window. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. Because that was justice, not vengeance, not cruelty. Just consequences catching up at their own steady pace. And me? I was sitting in my new home, sipping coffee with Hugo curled up at my feet, and I finally felt what I hadn't in years. Free.